Welcome back to the Tech Startup Network podcast. Joining me today is Ritesh Patel, the co-founder and co-CEO of Ticket Fairy, an advanced AI native vertical SaaS platform built specifically for the live entertainment industry. Ticket Fairy combines ticketing, fintech, AI, marketing automation, and real-time analytics to help event and festival producers across music, gaming and esports, and food and beverage increase revenue, reduce operational costs, and lower financial risk. Ritesh, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you? I'm excited to have you on and have you talk more about everything that you built at Ticket Fairy. And so that's where I'd love to have you get started, is sharing more about who you are and what you've built.
I think you just did everything for me. I think we're done.
I know, right? And there's an even more impressive bio that's in the show notes for our listeners to check through and find out all that you're doing.
I was like, she knows everything. Okay, this is good. This is a 30-second episode. But I will go into a little bit more detail. There's two founders in the company, myself and my brother Jigger. We had a few projects before this company, but really the background of this company, it kind of spans 10 years before it was created, where we were both involved in producing a series of, several hundred events in the UK. And then I moved to Australia and continued it there. And over that time, we kind of learned what the gaps were in the industry and how challenging it is. Simultaneously, I'm an engineer, I've been coding since I was 9 years old, and had ended up in a job as an engineer at an ad network, and then eventually into infrastructure building, kind of the large scale click logging and analytics for the ad network, and then moved to a second startup that was doing something similar. So kind of this company was a happy coincidental combination of a few insights from both industries, where it was kind of like, wait a second, events, live entertainment, festivals, venues, they're fun, but the actual work that goes behind them is really grueling and very capital intensive and very risky. And generally, the parallel is that it's a founder or two founders who have, decided on a creative vision. There's an audience that they're trying to service on the event side. It could be like music they want to push. It could be an experience. It could be a community they want to serve. But they've built a product and a vision, and they're very passionate. And it's not that different to being a tech founder. But the difference is that events companies don't have the access to the raw capital that maybe tech companies do, right? There's no real VC or seed investing for events companies is very rare. So you kind of have these very creative founders who don't necessarily also have the technical expertise to actually execute and market and all the different things they need to do. So the gap in this was kind of us deciding that we'd build a tech stack for that industry to monetize, increase revenue, streamline ops, and then also fill in all the gaps of what those creatives don't know and what they might take a decade to learn. We should productize that and put that into one platform.
And that makes a lot of sense because there's so much money that goes into producing these events and big festivals. And so like someone like yourself who's building this tech stack that these event companies will need in order to be successful, I think is huge. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that they don't have the access to raw capital like these tech companies do.
Right. And the thing is that, there's people that are very, very good at a creative vision and, something that needs to exist in the world. That doesn't mean they know everything in terms of how to execute.
Mm-hmm.
And often they don't, right? They could be a lot of electronic music is it's a very neurodivergent industry, and you kind of what you're doing, but then the other stuff, which is all the finicky things and all the admin and all attention to detail, it's often kind of that stuff's boring, I don't want to do it. And then suddenly you've got 1,000 moving parts the week of your event, and it's really overwhelming.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And you had mentioned that you got the idea for Ticket Fairy 10 years before you actually started it. And so I imagine that
it was more like 10 years of producing events kind of inspired the company.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that was going to be my question is if there was one defining moment throughout that we were like, okay, we really need to start this company, or if it was just collectively all of those event producing throughout that time that really nudged you in this direction.
So it was kind of almost a company by necessity at the time
Mhm.
because we had made some personal investments into a few different things. Some was like traditional assets, some was again the like tech companies that we'd invested into, like basically my brother, myself, and our family. And the 2008, 2009 crash happened, and then we lost all of it.
Yeah.
And so there was like a rebuild phase where I was like, okay, well, what's the next phase of the family, right? And so this company was kind of like it didn't really, it wasn't intentional. It just kind of like, when something just like pushes itself into your head because there's a few overlaps that you see, and then suddenly it's like it's the eureka moment. That's kind of how that happened. And and it was just kind of like a very much a wait, this is a really big deal. And this is like not just a little thing, it's an industry impacting thing globally. And we really need to build this. And so, it always starts with like one idea, which was like, what's the initial kind of MVP product, the thing that's gonna like, I guess, differentiate you from the market.
Mhm.
And we started with, and the kind of light bulb moment was basically a event ticketing workflow that also included fan gamification. And so what we did is we built this thing where like you could list an event and put it on sale, send that as the official place to register and buy your tickets. But then when your attendees would finish their purchase, they would get incentivized to actually market your event because they could earn back their ticket money. So they could go to your event for free. If they then, once they purchased a ticket, they could then like recruit a group of people to go, and then they would get a refund back on their card as the reward. And that's why it's called Ticket Fairy, because it gives you money.
Yeah.
And so we started with that, and we were like, well, we think that this is going to be like this one workflow could bring in another 10% in revenue for an event. And often that's all you need to like go from loss making to breaking even. And then we took it to the market and made a few refinements and ended up actually increasing sales by 20%.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we were like, this is a really big deal. And then we tried at scale as we scaled up the company, it worked at scale as well. And then we started getting case studies where it was like, oh, this event just made another like $600,000 in revenue, and this event just made another 100K. And eventually we got to a point where like we helped an event sell out so early that they doubled their attendance and made another $1 million. And it was like, wait, this is a really big deal.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and then we built the rest of the stack like over the years once we got that going. But it was like a really like, I guess, hang on a second, we can automate revenue for this industry. Which, if you say to someone who's struggling to run their events, hey, we can give you an instant 10 to 20% uplift without doing anything. All you do is you list with us instead of like say with Eventbrite or something like that. Everyone's going to think you're crazy. They're like, that's impossible. Like, if someone's been producing events for a decade, they'll be like, well, if I could make 10% more revenue, I would have done. But it's like, no, actually, like these are the things you probably thought of that you couldn't execute because the tracking wasn't there, the automation wasn't there,
Mhm.
the referral loops weren't there, and you would have thought of it, but you just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And and we did in the early days, we'd do a demo, and then someone would be like, wow, I've been trying to execute this for years manually by using like 3 different systems and like plugging different things together, and it didn't work. And I was like, well, no, it wouldn't, because you need to own the layers for it to work.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's a really good place, I feel like, to start with because it reminds me of gamification, where it's like companies who provide some type of incentive for their customers or users. I feel like it's almost like a psychological thing where it's like people are like, well, I want to keep trying because I want to get to that level or get to that free thing. And it almost,
Yeah.
I guess, becomes a game. And so it sounds like that what really was a good turning point for Ticket Fairy is that's what you saw. People wanted to get their friends and their family to go to these events too and get money back for doing so.
Right. And I don't know when that inspiration came, but we also added public leaderboards as well. And that made a big
Oh
difference.
my gosh, yeah. Because
Because
it's
it was like,
like people want to see.
yeah, like I'm the top influencer at this festival. And like we'd show the top 20 referrers. And then like I remember being at an event that was using us, and someone who I didn't know came up to me and was like, "Hey, I'm the number one referrer at this event, and I'm so happy." And they didn't get any additional incentive, but like just the recognition,
Mhm.
like it's so funny. Like that human nature is based around like recognition and being heard and like being seen as the like the cool person in your group. And like it did make like the biggest difference, maybe like revenue wise, but it did mean that people would keep trying to
Yep.
outdo each other within a group and then feel warm and fuzzy once they'd actually been recognized.
Absolutely. And so, since that was the first part of your tech stack, and you mentioned that you kept building on it after
Mm.
that, I would love to hear what came next and how you knew, like, what was the right step to take, like, what the next part of the tech stack was that you needed to build out.
So let's go back to 2013. One of our early clients, or one client that we were initially pitching, had a real issue where like they were selling out pretty quickly, like within 8 weeks.
Mhm.
And then they had issues with like ticket scalping and resale and kind of like, the secondary market issues that, you have with like, the StubHubs of the world and things like that. And so I flew to see them, and we spec'd out a safe, closed loop, face value only resale system with waitlist matching together. And then we built that and we launched that in 2014. And we were one of the first platforms in the world to have um, fully closed loop safe resale built into the primary platform. So we kind of tackled that next. And then for the following, like 10, 12 years, that festival doesn't have any scalping.
Mhm.
And so that's really important, especially now, like, there's been a lot of issues over the years with that. Then we started building kind of like inbuilt CRM and being able to do multiple landing pages and multilingual checkout, and then like managing guest lists at scale. And we started building all these ops tools where it was kind of like, wait, things that have been in spreadsheets traditionally shouldn't be in spreadsheets.
Mhm.
And then I was speaking on a lot of blockchain conference panels around kind of 2017, 2018. And we were getting pushed to launch a token, and we said no, because it was like, not the right time for it in terms of like consumer UX and things like that. It would just only put up barriers. But eventually in 2021, we found a use case where a client came to us and said they wanted to token gate their event and only allow people who owned their NFTs to attend it. And so we built this workflow where like the ticket page was gated with a wallet connect, and we could pull out all the tokens and verify that they owned a specific NFT against a whitelist, and that would allow them to register for the event. And so that was like our first like real blockchain flow that made sense.
Mhm.
And so like we've done a lot of things that kind of like, timing wise, they have to be right. Like it's good to say no
Yeah.
if it's not the right thing to do at the time. And then when it is, you kind of double down and you build something that's actually beneficial, not just like I'm using the tech for the sake of using the tech.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that you make because that was one thing that was coming to mind for me as you were talking about like all of the tech stack that you continued to build out after that is that even though something might be a no right now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be a no. To your point, depending on what's needed a few years down the line or however long it may be, then it could be something you build out if the timing is right and if it makes sense.
Right. And that's the thing. And often a lot of companies are too early doing something, and then like someone comes along 2 or 3 years later, and they're the ones that win, right? And
Mhm.
so like you have to pick the things that you focus on. Sometimes you can be visionary, and that's great. Like that whole like refer your friends thing. We were the first platform in the world to do that. But then often you have to be like, no, wait, there's the things you say no to are much more important than the things you say yes to.
Yeah, yeah. And that makes me wonder because that's a really good point that you mentioned there, where it's like that fine line of being too early with something, but also being too late with something. You don't want to miss the ball, or have a dropped opportunity because you waited too long. And so I'm curious to hear if you have any advice around that for founders who are thinking if it might be the right time to release a new feature or launch a new product, how they know if it's the right time or if they should wait a little bit?
I think it's two things. One is, well, maybe three things. One is just talk to customers as much as possible. I think the second thing is it really helps to be your own customer. So like I was an event producer, and so like understanding the challenges firsthand drove a lot of the product. And the third thing is Facebook was not the first social network, right? So like it doesn't matter if you're not first.
Yeah, that's a good reminder that it's like there are always going to be companies that come behind you, but it's okay if you're late as well because there's always going to be an opportunity, which is good.
Right, because you can also learn from the mistakes they made. Like I think Facebook did when they came in, I think it was Friendster was the market leader, and they couldn't cope with the traffic. And I remember using it at the time, and I was using it actively, and it just started slowing down and slowing down and slowing down. And then I guess like Facebook got their architecture right.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that like if they hadn't had infrastructure issues at Friendster, I don't think Facebook would have been as successful. I mean, obviously the college network stuff made a big difference, but like it really slowed the growth and the active users of Friendster at the same time as Facebook was trying to go to market. So it's like these two things in parallel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely should learn from what people have done wrong, because like the same idea can be executed in 100 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And on that note, what's something that you've done since building Ticket Fairy that you wish you did differently? Maybe it was like a lesson you learned or something that you did that you maybe didn't need to act on. I'd love to hear more about that.
We've built a lot of tech over the years that was like initially a one-off, and like it was for a client. Usually that tech gets reused at some point, but it can derail you when you're low in terms of like headcount and resources.
Hmm.
And so like there are projects where like we put a year into it, and the project never went live because the client decided that they were changing direction or something like that. And so those things, we've learned that like you have to start putting things in writing. You need break clauses. You need the things that like you have to just, if you're doing something that's for a specific client, even if you can reuse it later, like are you derailing your current roadmap? And I've often made those decisions where my team has just been like, is this the right thing to do? And sometimes it is the right thing to do, and sometimes it's not the right thing to do, and you won't really know. Like you have to gauge what the market opportunity is. But there's definitely things where we're kind of like, well, we didn't need to spend 100 grand in legal fees for that. Like we should have safeguarded ourselves first before we did that.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's something I think that's really important to remember is that like to just ultimately protect yourself is what it sounds like. Like being able to have those protections in place so that way you can prevent mistakes or things that you wish you didn't do further down the line from happening.
Right, right. And again, it's also about like everything is about a combination of first-hand experience and what you learn from others, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that you have to follow the herd, because that's also not a good thing for a founder. Like you need to like be unique and actually have your own path. And often like the craziest, weirdest founders are the ones that make the biggest impact, and they do it in a way that doesn't seem like it's going to be impactful at the time, and it eventually becomes a big thing.
Definitely. Yeah. And so, with us being in 2026, I'd love to hear where Ticket Fairy is going next. If there's anything new that you're developing or planning on releasing that you're able to talk about and share with us today.
A lot. I mean, I think that this year is going to be the biggest year for us in terms of the roadmap that we've been working towards over a decade.
Hmm.
But this year is very heavy on fintech for us. It's very heavy on AI for us. We are, I mean, we're doing regional expansions everywhere, but that's just like the business side. But on the tech side, there's a lot of stuff that we have been building that is even more of the business stack that's designed around kind of financial orchestration or operational orchestration. Extend AI extensions of the team where like you've only got a 2-person full-time team, but
Hmm.
there's 10 or 20 persons work to do, and so like really aiding that. And then we just launched a working capital product, so that kind of money that we talked about earlier that the events need, which is like, often millions. We now have a credit and capital product where we can provide that working capital for events before they go on sale. And so that is like, another layer where we think that that's going to make a big impact.
Yeah, and that's huge because that goes back to what you shared at the beginning, where it's like event companies can't always align with tech companies with missing that capital. But as you shared, to create a really great event and produce it, a lot of that money is required up front. And so I think that it's going to be really cool to think about all of the events that will come out of that product because of the fact they're able to support these producers with putting on great events and festivals.
Right. And initially we're not going to be able to necessarily go like, this is not VC. It's like, you have to have a track record. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be a competent event producer. But even the bigger brands, they don't have access to the millions they need.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really nice win-win scenario where like we get to work with a really great client and we get to bridge their capital gap. And then when they come on board, then there's all the kind of revenue increases and operational things we can help provide for their team and help the team to be more efficient and like it's kind of achieving the vision of what we set out to do.
Yeah, totally. And so, with that being said, I'm curious to hear if you have any advice for an early stage founder right now who's potentially just starting to build up their product, or maybe they've just launched for the first time throughout the past, it sounds like 20 plus years you've been in the business. I'd love to hear what you've learned along the way and what you'd like to pass along to other founders.
And this actually came up in conversation last night with another founder friend, which was if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money.
Oh, I like that.
You usually has the opposite effect. If you ask for money, someone tries to tell you how to run your business. If you ask their opinion on things and they feel like their opinion is valued, but you still know what you're doing, they'll often say, well, hey, look, to execute this advice, you probably need some cash and I can probably fund you. And that's actually quite a good way to do it.
Yeah. Did you get funding for Ticket Fairy?
Yes, we've raised over 10 million now.
Hmm.
Our first check was Justin Can, founder of Twitch. And actually, that was because I booked an advice session with him at a conference,
Oh, so there you
and
go.
we were talking about how bandwidth constrained we were as only two founders.
Hmm.
And he was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting. Let's talk because I could write you a check." And so that's how that happened.
Oh, wow. So that's actually a good reminder that it sounds like some of the best fits for investors or even other relationships can come naturally. Like it sounds like that was unexpected for you, but there you go, you found the perfect fit and then you were able to get the funding that you needed to get to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, look, this. I think that like over time you learn the tricks in terms of how fundraising works, and you also know like what is a turn off for people,
Hmm.
and also like you can push uphill for funding with a specific investor and they'll never invest because you didn't give them the right feeling in the first 30 seconds.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice to keep in mind. And on that note, too, as well, in terms of business relationships, I believe you mentioned that your co-founder is your brother. And so I'd love to hear more about that idea and that journey of having a co-founder, especially when it's someone that you're related to.
Um, it's not as difficult as it sounds because we had done a couple of other companies together before,
Hmm.
and you've got all your kind of squabbles out of the way when you're teenagers, and there's very little left to argue about unless it gets like really heated, and then you kind of realize that you're both on the same team, and like it's a joint thing you're doing for not just yourselves individually but your collective family, right? So
Yep.
you kind of decide that like anything that is ego driven or whatever, like it can be resolved pretty quickly because it needs to be.
Hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
a lot of companies, they have big issues with founder fallouts, and it's one of the big reasons that companies fail is that the founders fall out.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And there's even some talk too about how because there's so much technology that's come out, how previously startups that may have needed like a co-founder, now people can do it solo because of the technology that's supporting them. So it's
Right.
interesting kind of seeing that shift happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be single founder billion-dollar companies because of the orchestration they can build.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And on the topic of that, I always love to ask our guests to give a shout out to someone in tech who's doing something cool right now that they're really admiring. So it could be another founder, could be a VC, builder, really anyone is fair game, but I'd love to hear who you're feeling inspired by lately.
Let's go with the VC because often they don't get that many props. Jason Lemkin, who runs Sastra, and he's this like I've only met him once, but he's this very, very smart, like no fluff talk VC who just knows B2B software inside out and is really, really giving to the community. And like just shares a lot of knowledge and often like some like hard truth knowledge as well, which is like, you know, this, if you do this, this is wrong. If you do this, like this is not going to work. And then there's also the positive advice as well, which is like, you know, here's the things, here's where the industry is going towards. These are the things you need to work to. And and he's one of the few VCs that is like very public about, well, very publicly providing value, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah, that's a good shout out. Thank you. Ritesh, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to talk about Ticket Fairy and what you've built with it, which is so impressive. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
Very easy. Ticketferry.com or at Ticketferry. Super simple.
Perfect. And I'll include those places in the show notes for our listeners to easily find you from there. But thank you so much again for coming on today's episode of the Tech Startup Network podcast.
Thank you so much, Ashley.